Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, I would want to be in that building on a Saturday night.
What is up, gang? Welcome to the show. Bienvenue à HABS Therapy Day, a bilingual show for fans who value substance over spectacle. Pas de rumeurs, pas de clickbait, juste de l'analyse sérieuse basée sur les faits. We offer informed, reasoned perspectives on the Canadiens, des points de vue réfléchis, loin du bruit médiatique. If you're looking for honest discussion and real information, vous êtes au bon endroit. You are in the right place. This is HABS Therapy Day. Let's get going, guys. Welcome back to the show. It's been a little while. I took a couple weeks off. I haven't done a show in a bit. But today I wanted to talk to you guys about the Canadiens prospect pool and maybe have a discussion with you all about your thoughts on the prospects, where the Canadiens are with their prospect pool, and maybe talk about ranking the Canadiens prospects, what we think about them, what their futures look like, whether they're what their odds are of making the team in the end, where they fit into the Canadiens plan, and all of that. So again, this is a topic that I think invites your participation and your conversation and your contribution. So jump in the comment section, fire away, let us have it. On veut bien avoir vos commentaires, vos opinions, cette discussion sur les espoirs des Canadiens. Vous invite de donner votre opinion, si vous avez des opinions au sujet des espoirs, sur les rankings des espoirs qui vous pensez va être un joueur pour le Canadien un jour. Si vous avez des espoirs que vous pensez vont pas jouer un jour pour le Canadien, on aimerait bien avoir vos commentaires, vos opinions. Alors, joindre-nous dans la section des commentaires et vous pouvez demander des questions, faire vos commentaires et avoir une discussion au sujet des espoirs des Canadiens de Montréal. So jump in the comment section, guys. Fire away. Get over here on YT. If you're over there on TikTok, get in the conversation. Let us know what your thoughts are about the prospects, guys that you like, guys that maybe you don't like, and so on and so forth. So I know there's a lot of exciting prospects. One of the great things about being a fan of a rebuilding team is that you do get a lot of prospects to follow, and that's sort of where we are with the Canadiens right now. Before we get going, guys, maybe you can hit that subscribe button down below. Help us grow our community, maybe be a part of our community. We're trying to offer you all a place where you can have intelligent, objective conversations about hockey, and in particular the Montreal Canadiens. Once the season starts, we'll go back to doing our HABS After Dark show after each of the Canadiens games, and for the rest of the summer we'll continue to do episodes every few days or so, maybe 2 or 3 episodes a week of HABS Therapy Day, usually around this same time, noon time Eastern, 1 p.m. Atlantic time. So if that's interesting to you, hit that subscribe button and join us. If you're watching in a replay, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. You'll get notified when we are live. If you are watching the show live, it gives you an opportunity to comment directly and be part of the conversation. If you're watching after the fact, feel free to send me a question or a comment, and I'd be happy to address it either in the comment section or perhaps in a following show. Alors, si vous regardez cette émission après le fait, après la termination de l'émission, si vous regardez l'émission, on aimerait bien que vous nous joindrez en direct. On aimerait bien si vous serez partie de notre famille Recliner Sports. Alors, il y a un bouton en bas pour souscrire à l'émission, à la canal ici. Si vous voulez être un partie de notre équipe, de notre famille, poussez sur le bouton et on vous aimerait bien avoir partie de la conversation. So let's get going, guys. Habs prospects. Again, prospects are a huge part of any rebuilding process, whether it's in the NHL or any other sport. And Obviously we've watched in the last little while, we've watched the Canadiens, go through the first stages, the early stages of their rebuild. And part of that rebuild, of course, is, tearing the team down, but also then building the team up. And we've talked about it in the past that, in order to properly build up the team, one of the commitments, particularly in a rebuild, is to do so through young players and prospects, and to build players within your own organization, to focus on scouting and drafting, making sure that you have the right people in place, to make sure that you're scouting properly and that you're drafting the right players. Typically in the early stages of a rebuild, you'll be picking at the higher end of the draft, so you'll get the opportunity to be drafting the best players available from the junior and the college ranks. And then you have, of course, an ongoing emphasis on building from within, right? The focus in a rebuild is to build your organization from the inside, as opposed to going out and bringing in players from other teams through trade or free agent signings and so on and so forth. So that's sort of where the Canadiens are right now. Tyler has a question. Habs being $4 million over, are they planning on offering McTavish and giving someone up to end up be under the cut? Interesting topic. LJ Mooney is a hot topic also. We'll talk about LJ Mooney. Obviously we're going to go through a number of the Canadiens prospects, and I think LJ Mooney will be one of them, and he certainly is a hot topic. 100% agree with you, 100% there, Tyler. He is a hot topic prospect, and he's somebody I think we will touch on later. Again, I'm going to look at there was a tier list put out by Habs Eyes on the Prize by Hadi, and I always forget how to pronounce his name properly, Kalakachi at Habs Eyes on the Prize. There was a pyramid tier list put out of Canadiens prospects a few weeks ago, and we're going to look at that later on. And in that conversation, we'll look at LJ Mooney. As far as the Habs and their cap situation, I think their cap situation will probably see that get resolved. I think they're probably going to try and get rid of Carey Price's contract after September. September 1st, I believe, is when Carey Price's bonus is due to be paid, and at that point, the Canadiens may look to trade his contract to another team, in which case that would clear up a significant amount of space for the Canadiens. So I think their cap situation at this point anyway isn't what it will be going into the season. I think there will be some maneuvering that goes on between now and then. As far as making an offer sheet to Mason McTavish, I really don't see that happening. I think it's highly unlikely that the Canadiens would offer Mason McTavish an offer sheet. Is a trade possible? Maybe. A little bit more possible, but also I don't really see that being a likely thing to happen. I don't see the right deal being there for Mason McTavish and the Montreal Canadiens between now and the beginning of the season. I know it's nice to think about and nice to, believe that that's something that might happen, but I don't see it being a very likely possibility. Certainly don't see an offer sheet being. The Canadiens are not going to be very keen to give up significant draft capital for next year's draft, which is seen as being a relatively strong draft compared to this year and most other years. I think that the Canadiens are unlikely to want to give up that first round draft pick, especially, but even the later picks, I think will have some value there. So I don't see McTavish being a Montreal Canadien anytime soon. That's not to say it won't happen. If it does happen, I suspect it will be because the Canadiens get a really good deal. And again, that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's going to happen, is because I don't see Anaheim really giving up Mason McTavish without asking for a significant return for him, and likely more than the Canadiens would be willing to give up. So let's get back to the prospects. Again, the Canadiens have spent the first few years here of the rebuild gathering assets, gathering prospects, focusing very much on younger players. They've brought in a new scouting staff, as we know. They've taken a different approach to their scouting. It's a little bit more in depth. It's a little bit more comprehensive. They're a little bit more business-like with the way they do their scouting and their drafting. And in that, they've drafted a number of players in recent years. So we have this huge pool of young players within the organization, whether they're, still playing, in minor hockey, amateur hockey, or whether they're, at the NHL level or in the American Hockey League or what have you. There's a big pool, right? And we've seen all kinds of, things where, different commentators have said that the Canadiens have, one of the better prospects pools in the NHL right now. Some have ranked them number one. Some have said, they're in the top three. And that's, largely due to the fact that the Canadiens have put a heavy focus on drafting and on developing and building their players from within. So when you look at this pool, I think, the word prospect tells us a lot, right? The word prospect means, the possibility that something might happen in the future, right? So you're prospecting, you're obviously taking an educated guess, but you're bringing players in on the basis of your guess, your prospecting, the possibility that those players will someday contribute to your team. At what level they contribute or whether they contribute at all, will remain to be seen. Nobody can tell the future, but obviously you're expending those resources, scouting and drafting in the hopes that, these players will become something for your team down the road. Prospecting, the verb prospecting is the activity of searching for gold, oil, or other valuable substances. So again, you think about gold prospecting, right? You take a big handful of dirt, you put it in a little basket with some water, and you shake it around, and hopefully some gold comes to the top, right? And that's essentially what prospecting in the NHL is, right? You bring in a number of prospects, you bring in a number of players, players who you've scouted, you've looked at, players who you like, and some will sort of rise to the top like the gold does in the gold pans. And some won't, right? Some are going to succeed and some won't. So, in fact, the prospect of succeeding in the NHL is relatively low, right? There's not, not most prospects don't make it. The reality is that most prospects don't make it. So let's have a look at a graphic here. These are some graphics that I got from an article from Puckpedia. I don't know, I haven't searched and sort of verified the complete accuracy of these numbers. But even if they give you a general idea, here we see, the percentage of players in the NHL draft who end up playing 100 or more games in the NHL by round in the NHL. We see like only 37% of even first round draft picks play 100 or more games in the NHL, right? And then you get down to the lower rounds of the draft, and those numbers become even less. So the odds of these players making it are not the greatest. And so the scouting and drafting properly is really, really important. And also amassing a large number of assets is important too, because obviously if the odds are 1 in 10 or 3 in 10 or whatever they are, the more you have, the more odds you are to have players who end up succeeding, right? So by round, I'm not sure, this graph kind of conflicts a little bit with the previous one. So draft success by round, the first round, obviously the numbers are quite high, and then the numbers drop almost like in half, more than half in the second round, and then they just get progressively lower and lower. So what that graph tells us is two things, really. It tells us, obviously, the higher you're drafting, the more likely you are to succeed in drafting good players. But also, you can get players, in the later rounds who will play in the NHL for you, right? You will get players in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and even 7th round who will play a significant number of games in the NHL. And then we have the probability of playing in the NHL by pick, not just by round. So obviously, it's a pretty even graph there. Where the further along the draft you go, the less likely the player is to actually make the NHL. This is based on the drafts from 2000 to 2009. So if you're drafting number 1 overall, it's pretty certain that player will play 100 or more games in the NHL. Now, what level they play those games at is a different thing. Are you getting a superstar? Are you getting a franchise player? or are you getting a guy who, marginally plays 100 games in the NHL and doesn't do much more than that? That's the next question, I guess, beyond these graphics is, what kind of player are you getting? Like you draft number one, the Canadiens have Juraj Slafkovsky. He's already played 100 games, but he's still only 21, 22 years old. What is he going to become down the road? Is he going to become a 75, 80, 85 point first line player, or is he going to remain sort of what he is now, a 50 point guy, who plays maybe top line or second line kind of thing. So again, not only do we look at the number of games these players will play in the NHL, you also look for players who will make certain types of contributions to your organization. And then finally, this is a pretty simplified version of the numbers as provided by Puckpedia. You're picking a top 5 pick. You're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have a guy who's going to play significant time in the NHL. If you're picking between 6 and 15, you've got, I guess it's basically a 3 and 4 chance that player is going to be a contributor in the NHL. And then, of course, the numbers get lower and lower and lower the further you go along. But again, you also have to look at, what kind of player are you getting, right? What kind of player are you getting? Are you getting, a guy who is a first liner or a superstar, or are you getting a guy who's a fourth liner or a guy who might, come in and out of the lineup, be up and down between the American Hockey League, things like that. So it's hard to assess these these prospects. So when I say that the Canadiens have put a focus on scouting and drafting, it's not an easy job. It's not, it's hard. There's a lot of different variables involved here, and obviously, you get people who are experts who can, judge players' skills and so on and so forth. But that's a difficult thing for those scouts to do. And from our perspective, if we're looking at the Canadiens' prospects and trying to determine who is the best prospect and who's the second best prospect and what tier does this guy fit in, and what that's a hard thing to do as well, right? How do you compare a player who is still playing in junior hockey to a player who is playing pro hockey, right? So how do you compare a guy like Michael Hage, who's going into his second year at the University of Michigan? How do you compare him to Owen Beck, who is in the American Hockey League, is finished with his junior hockey career? He has a year of professional hockey under his belt, and so we know what he's like, even at the next level, right? So in assessing prospects, I think obviously what you're trying to do is you're trying to determine the likelihood of this player contributing to the team down the road, but different players are coming from different places, right? David Reinbacher didn't come from junior hockey. He didn't come from the NCAA. He came from pro hockey in Switzerland. So how do you assess a guy who came from pro hockey in Switzerland, or a guy like Demidov who came from the KHL? How do you compare him to a guy who's playing in the Canadian Hockey League or who's playing in the NCAA, right? So it's different, and it's hard to predict and hard to compare guys, because every prospect is coming from a different place, and every prospect has a different trajectory. Some players are late bloomers, right? Some players, end up playing, they get better at age, 18, 19, 20, and other players peak early, right? There are players who, peak when they're 15, 16, 17, and guys who, are surefire prospects when they're 16 and 17 years old, then kind of plateau off and don't really turn into a whole lot. So, those are things that you have to look at as well. So essentially what for me, what I try to look at is how does each prospect do as they advance to another level of hockey, right? How does Michael Hage do? Michael Hage obviously did really, really well in the United States Hockey League, the U.S. Junior Hockey League. He was, a star there. He was a star in minor hockey in Toronto, and the Canadiens drafted him on the basis of all of that. But how does he then transition into the next level? How does he transition into NCAA hockey, right? Can he continue to dominate and play at the same level in the NCAA against much older and more physical players Can he play at that same level as he did in the USHL, where he's playing against kids that are more his age and perhaps not as skilled and not as physical? And the answer to that question last year was yes, right? He did. He had a fantastic season as a freshman at the University of Michigan. He was arguably the best freshman hockey player in the entire NCAA last year, and he was able to sort of transfer those skills and that talent to the next level. Now the question is, how will he do in his second year? And then after that, the question will be, how will he do when he then advances to the next level? So, I mean, obviously the next level for him will be, going from the NCAA to, pro hockey, whether it's, in the NHL or at the American Hockey League level. Jacob Fowler is making that move this year, right? So Jacob Fowler just finished his second year at Boston College, very dominant, excellent numbers, appears to be a wonderful goalie. After having a good career in the USHL and with the the U.S. national program, he did his stuff there. Actually, I don't even know if he played in the U.S. national program. Anyways, but this year we'll see how he makes that jump. How does he make that jump from the NCAA to the American Hockey League? Right? Does he continue to dominate? Does he continue to put up the numbers at the American Hockey League? Does he continue to stop pucks at the same level in the American Hockey League as he did in the NCAA and in junior hockey? And so that's the next question. So, and if he can do that, then of course he becomes an even better prospect, right? He becomes a better prospect because now he's doing it at a higher level, right? It's one thing to be a superstar in midget or junior hockey or in NCAA, but if you're then able to be, a solid quality player at the American Hockey League, then you're proving it at a higher level. David Reinbacher playing the way he did, in the Swiss Pro League, men's league, demonstrated that he was able to play at that level against grown men. Whereas, some of the younger players who play in the CHL, yes, they had a ton of talent, but they weren't doing it against grown men. Ivan Demidov last year was able to show that he could play his game and he could sort of, his skill, his style, his game translated to the KHL. Alex Zarowski, right? Another example, right? Last year, he was playing in a low-level MHL team, and he obviously demonstrated a ton of talent there and a ton of skill and was dominant at that level. But what really I think turned a lot of people on to him was when he made the jump to the KHL in the playoffs last year and demonstrated that his game translates, right? That his game, his game doesn't just disappear when he gets to a higher level playing against better players and bigger players, right? He's just not another, dipsy doodler superstar guy who can, dangle and deke around, inferior players. He's a guy who can play within a system, and he's a guy who can play against, players who are as good or better than he is, right? He's not just the guy who's, he's not a big fish. He's not a big fish in a little pond. He's capable of being a big fish even in a big pond. So when you're assessing these prospects, these are all things that you have to keep in mind, right? Then you have your boom bust players, right? Your boom bust players versus your safe bets, right? You get players who are boom bust players. You get guys, like Lane Hudson, a boom bust player, right? The Canadiens took him late in the second round. He was a guy that they took a chance on, right? A lot of people weren't prepared to take a chance on him. LJ Mooney, right? Tyler brought up LJ Mooney early. Boom bust player, right? He could turn into something or he might not. You take a chance on those guys in the later rounds. And so where do you rank a boom bust type player versus a player who's more of a sure thing, right? Obviously, when you're drafting in the top 10, you've got guys like Ivan Demidov and David Reinbacher and Juraj Slavkovsky. Not to say that those guys are sure things, but they're certainly, you're not taking a huge risk when you draft those guys, right? Whereas when you draft, Hudson, Mooney, Jackeye, both of the Jackeye brothers, right? You're drafting these guys, they're boom bust players. They could boom or they could bust. So that's kind of the interesting dynamic too when you look at these players. Like you look at a guy like LJ Mooney, where do you rank him within the Canadiens prospect pool as a boom bust type player, right? Like compare him, let's say, to a Owen Beck. right? Owen Beck, second round pick, pretty solid background there for Owen Beck, right? It's almost certain that he'll play in the NHL someday, but he's not likely to be a guy who puts up 50, 60, 70 points in the league. Obviously there's a potential there for that, but it's a small potential. But that he's not going to just bust completely. At the very least, he's going to have a decent role as a fourth liner with a really solid two-way game, good defensive player, good face-off guy. He's going to give you that, almost certainly. Whereas LJ Mooney or some other players, these are guys who could become really, really high-level offensive producers who play top six role and contribute at a high level. But they could be nothing, right? So what would you rather have? Would you rather have a guy who is a surefire third or fourth liner, or would you rather have a guy who has a 25% chance of being a top six guy or a first line player? And then beyond that, how do you rank them, right? So if you've got a guy in your prospect pool that is a guy who, if he really reaches his ceiling, could be a first line player, how do you rank him versus a guy who, is almost certainly going to play in the league, but, he's most likely going to be a bottom six player, right? Would you rather have a surefire, solid bottom six player on your team, or a guy who has a 25% chance of being an offensive producer, right? Obviously, when you're ranking prospects, you also have to keep in mind what position they play: forwards, defensemen, goalies. Do you rank forwards higher? Do you rank defensemen? Do you rank centers higher than wingers? All these different things. So I guess the last thing you got to keep in mind as well is that development is typically not linear, right? Not every player just, goes on a steady path to getting better. We talked earlier about guys who, are late bloomers. Some guys, figure it out at a higher level and become great players, even though they weren't maybe the best prospects or the best junior players. Some players were incredible junior players, but just can't, translate to the NHL. Lane Hudson, I think, is a bit of an anomaly, right? A guy who, just continued to just go like this, and, the sky's the limit. He jumped right into the NHL and contributed right away. That's a pretty rare thing, right? More typical are guys like, Juraj Slafkovsky and Caden Gooley and David Reinbacher, guys who, may have to play in the, in the American Hockey League a little bit and, have to build their way into, they get better and better and better, but sometimes they take a little bit of a step backwards as well. So, so let's keep all those things in mind. We're going to look at the list here from Hadi Kalikechi at Habs Eyes on the Prize. I'm interested to see what your thoughts are. I'm going to put his tier list up on the board here in a second, but I'm going to get to Owen has a question. So since the Canadiens had picks in the later rounds, they most likely won't make the roster. So say like guys like Jarofsky, Handel, or Pickford, they will have to work harder than a first rounder. I don't know that obviously the likelihood statistically is that those guys are less likely to make the NHL or to play a significant role in the NHL. But again, we see that players in the lower rounds do make it to the NHL. We do see players who become, stars come from the lower rounds or even go undrafted. Obviously those players will have to, I think all players have to work hard to make it. But again, I think that's, another reason why you focus on your scouting and you make sure that your scouting is tight and that they're doing a good job, is because then the better you are at your scouting, the more you raise your odds, right? Like if the league's odds are a certain percent, if you have better scouting than, the other teams, then your odds are better, right? You do a better job of scouting, you bring in better players, and you have a better odds of your draft pick succeeding. And then development obviously is a huge issue too, right? Like some of these players don't make it because the development that they're exposed to isn't strong enough, right? The resources that are available to them, the coaching, all that other stuff, maybe that wasn't what they needed, right? They needed something different or something better, and so by focusing on scouting and development, you increase your odds that those picks will become contributors to your team down the road, or assets that you can use to trade or otherwise down the road. So specifically you're referring to, Żurawski, Handel, or Pickford. With a guy like Żurawski, your hope is that the Canadiens got a bit of a diamond in the rough, right? They picked a guy in the second round, and that, the hope is that he's one of those late bloomers. The hope is that he is a guy that the Canadian scouts, saw something in that the others didn't, and that they got him before the others did, and that, he's a guy who might be a late bloomer, who may turn into something, and the same goes for Handel, Pickford, or whatever. You obviously hope that your scouts see something in these guys that others don't, and that somehow, you pick them out of the crowd, or, they're the diamond in the rough, right? The prospecting, right? The gold in the pan, that other people may have passed on, and that your scouts were a little smarter and a little better at their job, and that you're going to give them the resources and every chance to succeed by putting them in the right situation as far as development goes once they're within your organization. So let's get to this tier list from Hadi Kalakachi. It was put out about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the HABS Eyes on the Prize website. You can go and have a look at it there, but I am going to put it up on the screen right now. Hopefully you guys will be able to read that. So essentially what he's done here is he's taken all of the Canadiens prospects. The limiting factors are age 23 years and younger with less than 41 games played. So guys like Slavkovsky and who else? Well, like Slavkovsky won't be on the list. A number of those other guys who are at the NHL, like Gouli, won't be on the list. Struble and Xhekaj won't be on the list. So it's all guys with limited NHL experience who are under the age of 23. And the tiers are, if you can read at the bottom, Tier 1 is a legitimate superstar. Tier 2 is a top-line, top pair, top 10 starter for goalies. Tier 3 is a top 6 forward or a number 2 or 3 defenseman. Tier 4 is a middle 6 forward or a second pair defenseman. Tier 5 is a surefire bottom 6 third pair potential or a boom-bust upside for skaters, likely backup for goalies. Tier 6 is a high likelihood bubble NHLer with very slim chance of making it. And then Tier 7 is a player who's unlikely to play any games in the NHL at all. And so, again, there's complications with this. Again, the complications we talked about earlier. How do you judge, a surefire third liner versus a guy who has a 20% chance of being a first liner? But anyways, I don't think we're going to get any argument regarding the top of this pyramid, Ivan Demidov. I think, he's quite clearly the top prospect in the organization as far as the parameters go, being under 23 and having played less than 41 games. He's definitely at the top of this pyramid. Legitimate superstar talent. I think that's a fair assessment. That's not to say that he's going to be a superstar. I don't think anybody has a crystal ball to say that, but certainly, what we've seen from him so far is that, he certainly has that capacity there, which again brings us to the question is, what are we judging these guys? Are we judging them on their ceiling? Are we judging them on their floor? Are we judging them on what they're most likely to become or what we think they're most likely to become? So that sort of lends some complication here. But again, I think Demidov, I don't think we're going to get a ton of argument here. If you do have any questions or disagreements or you don't believe that any of this is true, then I'm certainly invite you to let me know, because I'd be happy to discuss it. Tier 2, of course, is a top line, top pair forward or defenseman or a top 10 starter in the NHL for goalies. Hadi Kalakachi has left this tier empty. So he doesn't believe that there's anyone in the Canadiens organization who has or is likely to become a top line or a top line forward or a top pair defenseman or a top 10 starter in the league. I don't agree with that. I think that at this stage, Jacob Fowler probably has shown the potential to be a top 10 goalie down the road. Now, again, I'm not saying that he will be that. Just like I'm not saying that Demidov will become a superstar. But again, if we're talking about prospecting and what we think, is the likely result, then I think that Jacob Fowler is certainly in that category. I think that Hage and Reinbacher both have the capacity to be top line or top pairing players. But again, I don't know that is the most likely result for those guys. As far as Alexander Zurovsky goes, I think it's really too hard to tell, or too early to tell, pardon me. I think he certainly has the ability to be there, but he's obviously a boom-bust player. There's a lot that has to happen between now and the next, 3 or 4 years for him to, to become whether it's a top line or a top 6 forward. He certainly has shown the skill, but he certainly has to, there's a lot of areas of improvement on his game that need to happen in order for him to get there. So those would be my comments there. And then you get to your tier 4, which is your middle 6 forwards, second pair defensemen. So basically a second or third line forward or second pairing defenseman or a bottom 10 starter in the league. I always have a problem with the term middle 6 forward because I think the difference between a second line and a third line forward is enormous. I think the skill set and the profile of a second line player a second line forward is very different than a third line forward. To me, a third line forward has to bring a certain defensive component to their game. They have to bring a certain physicality to their game. They certainly have to bring, a certain doggedness to their game, if I could use that term. Whereas a second line forward to me is more of an offensive producer, right? So could be a smaller player. Smaller players, I think, are less likely to become third line players and fourth line players, bottom 6 players. Whereas the opportunity for them to become top line players if they have that skill set is a lot greater. So again, I always struggle with the term middle 6 forward because I think there's a huge gap between the second and third line. On this list, we have Papanikis, Kapanen, and Radkov. I think it's pretty early to put that. It's pretty early to put that on Papanikis. If you're putting that on Papanikis, then I think you obviously have to bring, guys like Owen Beck. I think you have to bring guys like Florian Jacki up into that category. I think Florian Jacki probably has a better claim to being in tier 4 at this stage than Papanikis does. I think the same would go for Radkov. It's pretty early to make that call on Radkov. There's a lot that has to happen for him to get to that stage. Even Engstrom, right? You could put Engstrom up there. But I get it. Like the next tier 5, is a surefire bottom 6 or a boom bust upside for skaters. So basically, what he's saying here is, in the 5th category, which obviously has a lot of players, you're looking at guys who definitely can play in the bottom 6 or in the third pair defense, but also have the potential to be better than that. So again, I don't disagree with any of those guys, and I'm not here to disagree with this list. What Hadi Kalikachi's done here is a very difficult thing to do, and it's hard to, like I said before, there's a lot of things that come into this, and it's hard to do it properly. But I think it's. I personally, I think would have Beck up in the next category. I think I probably would also have Florian Jacki up in the next category. The rest of these guys I don't really have a problem with. Obviously, some of these guys are further along in their development than others. Engstrom is far ahead of LJ Mooney and Pickford and Handel and those guys. Handel, that's a pretty high ranking for Handel, obviously for a guy who was drafted in the 7th round. So yeah, I don't really have a problem with that list. Then we get to the sixth tier, high likelihood of a bubble NHLer or a very slim chance of being a middle six second pair starter. Again, I'm not sure, like, high likelihood of a bubble NHLer. That means to me you're a guy who is borderline between the AHL and the NHL. I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that Luke Tuck probably is a little better than that. I think Luke Tuck is, probably more than a bubble NHLer. I think someday Luke Tuck will play in the NHL, whether it's for the Canadiens or not, I don't know. I agree on Davidson. I agree on Trudeau. I agree on Kidney. I think Konushkov is probably a little bit higher than that for me. Eriksson from the other category is probably down in this category for me. Same with Volokin. Who else we got there? Cannon. It's like I can read this better off my screen here. Mejar, I think that's probably right for Mejar. I think this is a big year for Mejar. And for Kidney, I suppose. Kidney is going to be tough for him to make the Canadiens at his size. Cornwallis, I mean, who knows? He's very early on. Quentin Miller, it's hard to say. Vincent Rohrer, I think you could move Vincent Rohrer maybe up to the next category as a guy who has demonstrated both offensive and defensive abilities that could get him a better look. So, and then of course you have the final category as guys who essentially are, long shots, not very likely to play any NHL games. I disagree on Middlestat, I guess I think Middlestat certainly fits in the tier 6 and maybe even tier 5. The Canadiens think really, really highly of him. They would have offered him a contract already, but for the fact that he said that he wants to stick around and play out his NCAA career. So I don't agree with him being at that level in the last tier as a guy who is not likely to play NHL games, or be a regular NHLer in any way. I would have him, in the 6th and maybe even the 5th tier here for me personally. So the others I don't really disagree with. I guess some of them, it's too early to tell. How do we know? Emmett Croteau, he's been around for a while. He's not likely to be an NHLer, I think, at this stage. So I think that's pretty fair. Ben Merrill, same, right? In the BCHL last year, didn't put up, spectacular numbers. So unless he's some kind of a late bloomer who really, I think he may be, I'm not sure where he's going in the NCAA, but I think he may be committed somewhere in the NCAA, but who knows? If he's a late bloomer, maybe that happens. But, other than Middlestat, I don't really have any issue with with that 7th tier, and Middlestat especially. I think I would even have him, in the 5th tier, potentially. So, anyways, that's a review of Hadi Kalikachi's list. I don't know what you all think of it. I don't know if you have any comments there, guys. I see over on TikTok, there's a few happy belated birthday. Thank you, Lemon Party. It was my birthday yesterday. I appreciate that. Should we expect a lot from Joe Veleno? I don't know what you mean by a lot. I don't know. We'll see how training camp goes for Joe Veleno. I think Joe Veleno is a guy who at one time was a superstar talent. Again, we talked earlier about guys who peak early versus guys who are late bloomers. Joe Veleno is a guy who, at least so far in his career, appears to have peaked early. But if he can regain or find that form that made him, a player who received exceptional status in the Quebec Major Junior League, if he can regain that, then, that's obviously a huge thing for the Canadiens. More likely, I think they're looking at him as being a guy who is a decent face-off guy. He's a left-handed center who, while hasn't lived up to expectations offensively, certainly if he has a strength in his game, it has been, as a forechecker, a guy who can be, an F1, an F2, a guy who can get in the other team zone. and create turnovers and recover pucks along the boards. Right. That's been, if there's one thing he's done well in his career so far, that would be it, and that certainly fits the Canadiens' game plan. I think that's something that they, value, and it's, as far as, the idea I think would be if he makes the lineup, the most likely spot for him would be to play a role similar to the one that Christian Dvorak played last year. He's not as good as Dvorak on the face-offs, but he probably is as good or better on the forecheck, and has a better offensive upside than Dvorak, and he's obviously cheaper. So again, I think that I wouldn't expect a ton from Veleno. If he gives you anything more than that, i.e. being a steady left-handed centerman who can win faceoffs and be good on the forecheck and play in your bottom six, I don't know that I would expect more than that. I think he's capable of more than that. I'm certainly encouraged by the way he's spoken to the media, as far as, acknowledging and recognizing and being self-aware about the fact that he has not yet lived up to his expectations, and that he's, excited to be in Montreal and wants to work to become the player that, he has the potential to be. I think that's exciting. And, I'm hopeful that, some of that can pan out, but as far as expecting it, I don't know that it's fair to expect it. So that's pretty much it, guys. Again, I think for me, if we're ranking the Canadiens' top prospects, under 23 who have yet to play half a season in the NHL, I think Demidov is clear at the top. For me, I think next year probably looking at, the next tier would be, Fowler, Reinbacher, Hage. Then you're looking at, I think Zarovsky, Papanikis are kind of in one category, and then Kapanen being a guy who's a little bit more advanced in his development. I mean, he's obviously played games in the NHL. He's played significant games in the American Hockey League. It appears at this stage that, Kapanen's not going to be a top liner, but, he could certainly be a guy who, he's an exception of a guy who could play on the second or the third line. If he's able to improve his offensive game, he could certainly step that up and be a second line player. But he also has the defensive acumen to be a third liner as well. Then you've got sort of this group of guys with pro experience who look like they will likely play in the NHL someday. Whether it's with the Canadiens or otherwise. I think at the top of that list you probably have guys like Owen Beck. You've got guys like Adam Engstrom. You've got guys like Florian Jacki. And then a next step down, you've probably got guys like Joshua Roy, who's kind of gone down the ladder of the prospect pool. And then you've got probably Farrell. Then I would probably put, guys like Majar, Kidney, and Rohr there. And then you've got some of the younger guys in that category, with your Moonies, your Thorpes, your Sawyers, your Protts, even your Sam Harris, as guys who are still early on in their development, but have the potential to be in the mix for the Canadiens someday. And then, after that, I think you've got your long shots. Like you've got your, I guess Tuck would go in that category as the guys who, with AHL experience. But then you've got your long shots. You've got guys like Cannon and Cournoyer and Vekvanix, and, and then you've got your, Volokin, guys like that. And then, of course, you've got your guys. Middlestat, of course, belongs in that category as well. The above category, like the in the category with the Sawyers and the Protzes and whatever. So, but then, of course, you've got the guys who aren't likely to make it. And the reality is that most of these, guys are not going to make it, right? Most of these guys aren't going to play for the Montreal Canadiens someday. Most of these guys will never play, will never wear the Montreal Canadiens jersey. most of them won't play in the NHL anywhere. But again, so that's the way, you got to look at all this. You got to look at all the factors. Where are these guys coming from? Where are they in their development? How have they done as they progress from one league to another, or one level to another? How have they done? Are they a player who fits the mold for the Montreal Canadiens? As far as skill, style, whatever, all ththese different things. So, yeah, that's my assessment of the prospects, guys. That might be a little bit all over the place, a little bit. A little bit more conversation would be nice if we had some guys in here asking some questions. I do appreciate the questions over on TikTok from Lord and from the rest of you, and also over here from Tyler and Owen. But that's going to be it for today, guys. That's it for today's show. Thanks so much. Like I said, if you're watching in a replay and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so down below. You can hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, hit the notification bell, all of that good stuff. Maybe I'll put together my own list of prospects heading into the season. I'm always hesitant to make my own list because, like I said, there's so many variables when it comes to assessing a prospect. As far as where are they in their development? Do you rank a guy who is a surefire third liner higher than a guy who has a boom bust situation where he might be a first liner, but he might not make it at all. So I hesitate, but maybe I'll put something together and see what we can do. Kevin over here says, would I put Florian on the fourth line? I assume you mean, would I have him on the fourth line for the Canadiens this year? And again, it depends on training camp. I think that for Jack-Eye to make the Canadiens in any role this year, I think he has to have a spectacular camp. I think the preference would be for him to spend another year in the American Hockey League. Not, I guess for a number of reasons. One, I think they believe that's probably what's best for his development. Two, whether he's ready to play in the NHL or not remains to be seen. Just because you had a good season in the American Hockey League doesn't mean you're necessarily ready to make that jump. They'll want to see some more consistency from him, and maybe I'm certain that there are aspects of his game that they'll want him to work on. Plus, there's a lot of guys that he would have to beat out for that job. Like, is he beating out Joe Veleno for that job? Is he beating out Jake Evans for that job? Is he beating out who's he beating out? Whether he plays center or on the wing. Like, if he's playing on the wing, is he beating out Gallagher for that job? Is he beating out who's coming out for him to stay in, right? So I think it's the most likely scenario is that Florian Jack-Eye spends another year in the American Hockey League, but stranger things have happened at training camp, and if he comes in and just blows the doors off everybody, I think he's a guy who certainly has the potential's there, and if we went to the beginning of last year and anybody even suggested the idea that Florian Jack-Eye might have a chance to make the NHL in 25-26, I think people would have said you were crazy. So the fact that we're even talking about it is a demonstration of how well he did last year, and how much closer he is to being. If we did this tier list last year, I certainly don't think we would see Florian Jack-Eye in tier 5, or even I think he might even be in tier 4 at this stage of his career. I think he probably more likely would have been in tier 6 or 7 last year. But again, as far as him being a regular on the Montreal Canadiens this season, I think that's pretty unlikely. But again, Jack-Eye brothers tend to do things that aren't expected of them, and they tend to exceed expectations. So I wouldn't put anything past Florian Jack-Eye. So thanks for the question, Kevin. I appreciate it. So that's going to be it, guys. Merci beaucoup. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui. Me personally, I'd give him another year in the AHL. I think that's probably what's going to happen. But again, it's not something that I think they'll decide in July, right? It's, there's going to be a number of players who get invited to camp, and everyone's going to be given an opportunity to show what they're made of. And, like I said, for the reasons I already said, I think he's more likely to play in the American Hockey League. But, anything's possible. So, merci beaucoup tout le monde. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui. On va sûrement avoir une autre émission cette semaine, probablement vendredi ou samedi. That's probably it for now, guys. We'll probably have another show later in the week. I'm thinking Friday maybe in the afternoon or Saturday. I'm not quite sure just yet. But that's it for now, guys. Like I said, I'd love for you guys to follow me. I'm trying to grow the community here. I'm hoping that the daytime shows will be something that's a little bit more accessible to you all. I'm trying to keep the shows a little bit shorter. This one's a little bit longer than I would have liked, but keep it a little bit shorter for you guys if you want to watch them after the fact, so that you're not, it's not such a commitment to sit down and listen to it. We are going to be having a really exciting guest coming up, probably not next week, but the week after. I gave a hint during the last episode as to who that might be. But he's a guy who I really respect on the Montreal Canadiens media side of things, and has done a lot of really big things lately. He's been front and center with a lot of interesting stuff, and I've really grown to enjoy his content and respect his opinion. So I'm looking forward to having him on the show. But that's it for now, guys. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button. If you're watching in a replay, thanks so much. Fire away in the comment section. Let me know if you have questions, if you have you agree with me, disagree with me. If you have any feedback on the show itself, if there's things you think I could do to make it better, or things that you like about the show, then I certainly welcome that as well. So thanks so much, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to doing it again soon. Peace out.
Pour un gars d'ici, être le directeur de général des Canadiens est une occasion d'une vie.
Enjoy the moment, you're in the NHL here.
Working for the Montreal Canadiens is a dream. La plus grande franchise dans la histoire du hockey.
If it was my last day on this planet, and you told me what would you like to do, we want to be in that building on a Saturday night.